Welcome, friends. It is a great joy to see you all here. I am really thrilled that we've reached this evening where some very old friends and some new friends will get to learn together. My name is Frances Kramer. I think that we are recording live to, not live, we're recording to YouTube. And the only faces that will be visible are the spotlit ones here. I serve as Director of Education at Pendle Hill. Pendle Hill is a experiment in spiritual learning community that has been meeting together and learning together outside of Wallingford, Pennsylvania on Lenape land for almost 95 years now. And I, in this role, have had the incredible luck and honor of learning with and supporting Valerie Brown in a number of workshops that some of you have attended. And it's just been a real kind of a highlight and an inspiration of my time here. And so when Valerie told me that she was writing this book, I was delighted. She explained the book is named Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation. And she wrote the book along with Marisela Gomez, who's here with us, and another author, Kyra Jewel Lingo, who's not able to join us tonight. And all three of these women are Black women teachers in the Plum Village tradition founded by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. And the book shares conversations touching on the pain and beauty of their families of origin, relationships and loneliness, intimacy and sexuality, politics, popular culture, race, self-care, and healing. And I could not wait to read this book. It was as kind of vulnerable and real as I had hoped for. And I've just been really looking forward to the opportunity to learn tonight with Valerie and Marisela. So for those of you who don't yet know these friends, Valerie is an author, Buddhist Quaker Dharma teacher, facilitator, an executive coach specializing in leadership development and mindfulness practices with a focus on diversity, social equity, and inclusion. A former lawyer and lobbyist, Valerie transformed her high-pressure 20-year career into serving leaders and nonprofits to create trustworthy, authentic, compassionate, and connected workspaces. Valerie is teaching in the Pendle Hill Spring Term 2025, and she can be reached at www.valeriebrown.us. Marisela Gomez, who I just had the pleasure of meeting this evening, is a mindfulness practitioner in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing, a public health scholar activist, and a preventive/alternative medicine physician of Afro-Latina ancestry. She lives in Baltimore and is involved in land liberation activism and community rebuilding and research. She is the author of Race, Class, Power, and Organizing in East Baltimore, and co-author of this Healing Our Way Home, and of numerous book chapters in popular and scholarly publications. You can contact her at www.baltimoremindfulnesscommunity.space or mariselabgomez.com, and all of that is in the chat, thanks to Maddie, my colleague at Pendle Hill, who's helping with tech tonight. Just to let you know where we're headed tonight, Valerie is going to open with a meditation. The authors will then introduce their book, and I will get to ask them some initial questions. After that, we will open it up for audience questions through the chat, and Marisela will close us with a meditation. And I will then wish everyone good night. So I'm just filled with gratitude to have reached this moment, and I will pass it over to Valerie.
Thank you so much, Frances, and thank you, Maddie. So, and welcome to everyone. It's just so delightful to see new faces and old faces. I'm incredibly grateful that you're here. It just warms my heart that so many of you have joined this session. So thank you for being here. And while I'm thanking folks, I want to express my deep gratitude to Dr. Marisela B. Gomez for being here and for taking the journey together in writing this book, as well as Karajul Lingo. And I believe Karajul's website is in the chat. Another extraordinary Dharma teacher and spiritual, deeply spiritual friend. I also want to acknowledge and thank the entire Pendle Hill community for everything that you've done to support me and support us as authors and writers in getting the book out. So thank you, Pendle Hill. So with that, I'd invite us to settle in to a moment of centering. Maybe if you're anything like me, you might have had a pretty busy day and hardly had an opportunity to even notice one or two breaths. And so this is an invitation for us to reconnect with the breath and the body and this moment. So I'd begin by acknowledging that my feet are touching the ground in the traditional lands of the Lenape people, the Lenape nation, and specifically an area called Aquatong, which means spring in the bushes. It's currently known as New Hope, Pennsylvania. So take a moment and collecting your energies, perhaps beginning by feeling your feet on the floor. And aligning the body, stacking the head over the shoulders over the hips, and the knees over the feet. And coming into a posture that feels comfortable for you. So again, connecting with the feet on the floor, feeling the sits bones, a sense of your own groundedness. Connecting with the front part of the body, maybe feeling the area around the heart, a quality of openness and receptivity, a kind of aliveness as you breathe into and out of the center of the chest, the heart. And taking a few breaths there. And simultaneously bringing your awareness to the back of the body and noticing how the spine keeps you erect. Feel the strength, the support, the flexibility of the spinal column, and growing taller. And now turning to the breath. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. In and out. And taking just a few deep breaths, feeling the flow of the in-breath and the flow of the out breath. Coming back to the sensation of the breath as it comes into the nostrils, and then the breath as it leaves the body. And then maybe taking another deep breath in and a deep breath out. And if the eyes are closed, taking a moment to gently blink them open. And feel free to stretch in any way that's comfortable, maybe inhaling the arms up and stretch, and floating the arms down. So thank you. Francis, shall we turn back to you, or
Are you ready
for
for some questions?
sure, yeah.
Or did you want to, I think you were going to share a little first about why you wrote the book and how the book changed you.
Sure, that's a good place to begin. I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, so let me pass to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Marisela Gomez.
Thank you, Valerie. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting me into the space. Much appreciated. Thank you, Valerie, for the meditation. It was very, it was very on time, as you say. It's been a day. So the book came about because Valerie, at a conference on mindfulness in education, we met up with each other. The three of us happened to be at the same conference in DC. Not planned that we would see each other, just so happy to see each other, because it's seldom that we actually are all together at the same time. We might run into each other at maybe two, but it was the three of us, and Sister Peace as well, who is a nun in our tradition, in the Plum Village tradition that we all three practice in. A tradition started by our dear teacher, beloved teacher, the Venerable Thích, Vietnamese monk, who really brought practical mindfulness, the way you can embody and live mindfulness daily, to the West. So we're as teachers in this tradition, we're ever so grateful for our teacher, because we know each other through this practice, and found ourselves with each other, all four of us sitting, I think, having lunch. And Valerie said, "I think we should write a book." And then we just stopped and looked at her and waited for more. Inquiring minds wanted to know why. Um, and uh, and then she shared that it would be really good for four Black people, female identified people, to talk about this healing journey, what we've gone through, so others can learn, others like us could learn, and others who aren't like us can learn. And we all said yes. And then we were very happy. I think we were just giddy from being with each other, and just also, would have said yes anyway. if she had said, let's write a comic book, not to compare, we probably would have said yes. That's how we feel about each other. Um, um, and and then fast forward more than a year, really, and then we started meeting. So the book came about through meetings on Zoom for over a year, about a year and a half, where we would have conversations on Zoom. It took us through the pandemic, which was actually a blessing to be with each other during these difficult times. Took some breaks because uh, Valerie had some loss in her family, and others had breaks, different things happening in our lives. I was ill with COVID. Um, and then it was finished and transcribed, and voila, here you have it, this book. Um, uh, but really, the book was, if you ever would say the book was talked up or talked forward or came out of kitchen table talk, it really was that, is that. It was talked out. And um, I think one of the reasons that it was talked out was because um, we're good friends already, and then we don't, like, as I said, seldom the three of us are together, or the four of us. It happened to be the three of us that ended up being able to schedule out the time, um, and so to be able to be with each other and to share. And I'm emphasizing that relationship, the friendship, because it really is what started it, continued it, and the continuation of this book is that we continue to meet and go deeper, even because of the book, because the book brought us together even more. We shared our vulnerabilities. We healed together from being listened to in such caring ways by people around us, who we trusted. And so since the book's been published, we've scheduled vacations together, and we've had 2 vacations together, where we just play and just dance and go deeper
Cook.
and, and eat and eat some yummy foods. Some of the recipes from the back that we shared in the in the back of the book. So that's really the book. So it's a living book. It continues to live on, actually, because we continue to engage with each other and go deeper on our healing, share about what it is that we're still healing. So the book's not done in this way. Healing happened during the book being um, um, cultivated or co-created, and then healing continues. So it's actually a very it's like a tonic, uh, a tonic. You know, I grew up in Belize. In Belize, they used to give us tonic as kids to like clean us up and get us going every summer. Get the stuff out that didn't need to be there and get us ready for the next school year. Um, and so this book is like that. It helped us heal many things, clean us up, and got us ready to keep doing what we need to do and to continue to heal. Um, so I think I'll stop there in how the book came to be. Yeah, and the benefit of it that continues on and will continue on. As long as we still have breath, we will continue to heal together. So it's a very beautiful legacy of this book, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such a beautiful introduction. I'd love to hear also, Valerie, if you want to add anything about the impact that this book has had on you and your relationship with the co-authors as well.
Yeah, I'm I'm so grateful, and I do not take for granted the importance of spiritual friendships and connections and deep connections. to have a friend that really sees me and knows me. It's a precious gift. And so, yes, I think the very basis for the book is the friendship that we three have cultivated over, many, many years, decades, really. And in addition to our friendship as a gift, our being students of Thich Nhat Hanh, we realize that is another precious gift, that we have uh, we have been his students. We've sat with him and had direct contact with him and listened to countless of his teachings. And so we realize how those teachings were like a precious gift that were handed to us, and that we then, as teachers, being given the gift of being a teacher, to really pass on what we have learned to other people for the benefit of other people, not to keep the teachings, the information that Ty shared with us to ourselves, but to share that with other people, and how important that is. And, as Marisela mentioned, the very unique perspective that often, certainly in Buddhism, is rarely heard, which is the voices of Black and Latino people. I mean, this is like very seldom heard in the Buddhist community. And so we really felt that we wanted to make a contribution. We wanted to have that voice heard in, in the wider Buddhist community. And, the you know, the wisdom of interbeing from the teachings of Thai and the teachings of Buddhism in general is that, the disappointments, the suffering, the hard times, and the joys are all interconnected. And so the decades of hard-earned wisdom, as teachers, as friends, as individuals, as Black and Latinx people, that we really felt that we wanted to share that with the wider community. The book was written at a time, as Marisela pointed out, of a lot of that continues. Political polarization, disruption, and we think it still, and it continues to be, a valuable resource, and will be so in the future. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I feel really grateful to kind of be brought into this conversation, into the teachings of Thai that you're passing on, and kind of that you're inviting everyone in this room and all of your readers into that conversation, into that community of learning together. I'm gonna have a couple of questions for each of you individually. Marisela, as we talk about community, I understand that a major aspect of your work is organizing for equitable and sustainable community rebuilding. And for those who may not be as familiar with Sangha, which is one of the three jewels of Buddhism, meaning spiritual practice community, can you talk a little about its importance in self-discovery and how it informs social and political activism for you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. Um, so as Francis shared, the Sangha, in Buddhism, we have what we call the three jewels. We go and take refuge in the three jewels once we decide maybe this is a path I want to check out, and maybe it'll help me with my suffering, and understand and be able to take care of my suffering, have a joyful life. It's not all about suffering in Buddhism. In fact, it's all about joy. And when you decide that, you're invited to take refuge in the three jewels. So you don't take refuge in the Buddha only, you take refuge in the three jewels, which is the Buddha, the teacher who was awakened, and the teachings, the Dharma, the Sanskrit word, the Dharma for teachings, the teachings of this awakened being, which is what Buddha means. And then the Sangha, the community of practitioners, those who are the practitioners, meaning those who are practicing the teachings, who are taking the teachings into their daily life and doing their best to practice it, fellow practitioners. And in our tradition, particularly, I believe that the Sangha, the community of practice, is something that our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, we refer to lovingly as Thai. Vietnamese means teacher. In our tradition, Thai really focused in on Sangha, taking refuge in the Sangha. In fact, many times he would be asked, who's going to be your continuation? Meaning, when you're passed, who's going to take, quote, take over? Who's going to be you? And he would say, the next teacher would be the Sangha. And he would even say the next Buddha would be the Sangha, meaning not one, not two, but the community of practice, the practice community would be the Sangha, would be the Buddha. So this is a deep teaching in our tradition, and it's one that I always believed in doing social justice work for all my adult life in different venues, public health, housing and health, land liberation. We're always building collectives, trying to bring together cooperatives, ways that we can cooperate, be in a collective to make change. Having been an organizer, community organizer, that's all about building power through a base, and we say it's base building. We're building a base of power, a base of people who come together, and that only in doing so as a group of people can we really affect change. So for me, even before became and came to the Dharma, as we say, and took refuge in the Dharma and the jewels, I already believed very strongly in community as the way forward. So that was already very much there. What I learned in the teachings is that it's not only taking refuge in any old community, it's taking refuge in a community that's practicing in their own way their own self-liberation, because in that practice of our self-liberation is how we then help others liberate themselves. So not so much in the organizing communities, and at least over my adult years, is such an emphasis on the going back to ourselves and our spiritual development. And it doesn't have to be the word spiritual, it could be healing, it could be figuring out who we are, why we do the things we do. How come I keep doing the same thing over and over again? Why do I do the same thing and expect some different outcome? All these kinds of deep questions that we face and interrogate, I believe, when we're on a spiritual path, trying to understand ourselves, why we do the things we do. How can we be the kind of person we think we could be? The fire inside that keeps telling us that there's something else there, and that something else is not perfection. It's actually just our most innate kind self, the most true self that there is inside. So that exploration, what the Sangha and the teachings in general, I think, emphasize for me is the need to really go home and take care of yourself first. It's fine to go out and do all the activity, the political activity, and I certainly do that. But the Dharma really invites you and offers you a practice container with other people, other siblings, also practicing, a place for you to take refuge and see other practitioners doing the same thing and help to remind you when you forget that maybe this is what I can do. So one of the reasons I think we all emphasize the spiritual friendship that we continue to develop during the writing of this book and continue to develop after the writing of this book, I think speaks to the healing that came from that. It's a very practical example of what happened when three people who are practicing and who love each other can get vulnerable enough to look at what their suffering is, like what is there that's causing me this quiet, this ease. And when someone listens to me deeply, what happens? There's a transformation, a transmutation occurs from that listening, the deep listening, and someone connecting and say, I hear you, I'm listening. So I think they all go together. You can't separate the self-reflection and the going inward from the outward political activity. In fact, I honestly think that in social justice spaces, the lesson of the 21st century, if we choose to get it and receive it, is going to be really recognizing that they're not separate. That if you're really going to be about justice and social change, that it needs to go hand in hand with the inner work, the reflection that's needed so that we can do that work of social change from a place of love and connection instead of from a place of hatred and anger and rage. Anger can wake us up and get us moving. It's like sometimes the fire that's the ignition that starts the thing. But that anger without a self-reflection practice, without an ability to guide it and know, to observe it and to see, this is anger here. Now what am I going to do with this anger? And not let it just go and expand itself without any care. It would take us into places that where sometimes we might feel it's okay to do to others what they're doing to us. And that's not going to bring us to a place of true peace, is it? Or true justice. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. There's so much richness there and kind of in conversation with so much of what Pendle Hill is about as well. So it's really wonderful to hear those themes echoing in a different vocabulary. But you mentioned partially the intimacy and the relationship built on shared vulnerability. And I know both of you share in the book very generously about your own paths. Valerie, I think you share in the book about your own trajectory, and I'm curious, before becoming a Dharma teacher, when you were a lawyer and a lobbyist, how do you think that high-powered background influenced your current teaching? And if you could go back in time to teach your previous self, what would be the biggest piece of advice you could give her? And I wonder if there might be some echoes of what Marisela just offered and some of that advice that you would give her.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Where to begin with that question? Just as you asked the question, I was thinking I was thinking back to the time that I was in law school, and I had the great privilege of going to a historically Black institution to go to law school, Howard University. And I went to school at the time of the great civil rights leaders. So people like Justice Thurgood Marshall was a very frequent visitor in the school. And of course, we, as law students, read Brown versus the Board of Education. We knew the case cold. We adored Justice Marshall. And I raise his name because he had probably one of the most significant impacts on me as a young law student, and really was formative in shaping my thinking that led toward whatever career I was going to develop. And I've shared this with other people before, but one of the things that Marshall always asked us before he would start any lecture was he'd begin with a question. And his question to us as law students, which I will never forget, was, what is the quality of your intention? What is the quality of your intention? Not what is your intention? What is the quality of your intention? He was pointing to something that was deeper than uh, outcome, result. He was pointing to a sense of meaning and purpose. And to fast forward, Thich Nhat Hanh has spoken greatly about the same quality, and he calls it volition or aspirational purpose. And for Thai, this volition, this aspiration, our intention, if you want to use a colloquial term, he says, is the very ground of our being. It was what motivates us to wake up in the morning. And Thai and many others advise that aspiration should spring from a heart and a mind that is awakened, that is filled with bodhicitta, or a mind and a heart in the direction of love and compassion, of service to others. This is almost exactly what Marshall was instructing us, almost exactly. And so becoming a lawyer, I didn't go to law school to be a Dharma teacher, and I've said, it was a really crass reason for going to law school. I was living in poverty, and I wanted to get out of poverty and get out of Brooklyn and make money and stuff like that. And so, I'm not proud of some of the aspiration, the volition that I had initially around it, but I had these incredible role models like Justice Marshall, who pointed in the direction of how to live. And so my career as a lobbyist, I think initially was all about power and influence, which is the job of a lobbyist, to try to influence the direction or the course of a matter. But at some point in time, when after I met Thich Nhat Hanh in mid-1990s and began practicing mindfulness meditation, and really through the work of the community. As Marisela pointed out, this is obviously not something one can do alone, but with the practice in community, I changed from the inside out, meaning that my values changed, my way of thinking changed, my way of speaking changed, my way of standing changed, my way of listening changed. And then people began to say to me, gee, you don't seem like a lawyer. And then I realized at some point, I guess I'm not. Then who am I? Who am I? If I'm not what I spent all this money going to law school and all this time, who am I? And that's when the journey began. I'm still on that journey. Just yesterday, I was listening to a podcast with Dick Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems. And he was talking about the emergence of self, meaning what the Buddhists, what we're talking about here, this capacity for Buddha nature, this sense of bodhicitta, mind and heart that is curious, open, and awakened. And as I was listening to Dick Schwartz talk, I thought, he's speaking about Buddhism. He's speaking IFS, this whole field is exactly what our teacher has been instructing us. He's written about this in over 100 books. He uses somewhat different language, but we're talking the same thing. So I would double click what Marisela had said, that this is a change that begins on the inside, and then it manifests outwardly in how we move in the world. And that's where all critical change comes from. Starts on the inside, and then we are able to share that with other people. And this is a lifelong journey, right? And we don't do this alone. And there are many, many, many skills and practices that are required that in the modern grind culture that we live in get trampled. And so it takes a lot of courage and clarity and prioritization to say, no, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to prioritize what is truly important to me. And that's an act of radical resistance in many ways. And it is a radical act of love. So thank you for the question.
Thank you both. I have a million questions I could ask you all night long, but I would love to give you all the opportunity to read a little bit from the book and then open up for questions from the audience.
Marisela, you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm happy to. So I'll read a short portion here on refuge, taking refuge in ourselves. This is from the True Refuge in Oneself chapter. And
what page are you on?
page 68.
Okay, thank you.
During the isolation of the pandemic, which here in the US dug its heels in at the beginning of March 2020, we were in an intentional way starting to rethink our relationships with others just because of the fact that we were not able to be around our networks and our places too, right? We define ourselves by how a place reflects back to us ourselves, how we are in that place. The idea that we self into different beings, we show up differently in each different situation. So I think place helps to shape us and shape who we are in general and who we are in different situations. When I'm in nature, by water, hearing bird song and seeing green and flowers, I self into another Marisela, if I'm here to receive it. When I'm in the city or in a more densely populated area and I'm walking by unhoused people and it's hot and it's a minute before I see a tree, there's something else that stirs and arises in me, and there's something else I receive too, right? I think place and the people who are in those places really define us. During the pandemic, I had to quarantine and was blessed that my place then was near nature. Becoming ill myself and navigating how we understand ourselves in relationship to others when we are away from them, that is normal. This has been really interesting for me because when I got sick, I self-isolated because I like being alone, and it's my go-to for healing. It's my go-to when I'm not sick, and it certainly becomes my go-to when I'm sick. Being in nature makes me feel even more isolated from others because then find myself reconnecting with nature in such a deep way that I don't need anything else. The conversation with the flower and the bird becomes a little more real, deeper. The water starts to really become me. I reconnect with nature. However, when I had to start taking these very high doses of steroids that threw me out of my sense of who I am and agitated me, my baseline was not calm anymore. My mind and body were agitated. There was a lack of focus and an easy rolling off into subliminal spaces that really changed me. I had never before felt unable to define where my mind state was going to be in any one moment in time. It was a relationship, though, that brought me back. A good friend noticed I was writing some incomprehensible things on email. Then I lost my phone. I didn't get one again for a month. She really pulled me back in, it was a come to Jesus moment. She said, "Oh, you're not Marisela. You're acting in a dissociated way right now. It's not normal. It doesn't make any sense to be ill, to be isolated, and to not have a way to engage with people if you need them." In those moments, I hadn't thought of that. That didn't even cross my mind. I was in my world and dealing with nature. My reality shifted, and it was a relationship with another human being that knocked on the door and said, "Here's why this is not normal. This is why we are in relationship with people." The Buddhist teachings remind us that spiritual friends are not just a part of the path of awakening. They are the whole path of awakening. Once I was woken up into understanding the need for communication and friends again, she said she was going to call me on Skype every day to make sure I got a phone. I needed this relationship to remember what I had to do in those moments. When I shared this with another friend, she too started gently getting on me about the phone. My network, my relationships were re-manifesting around my illness and its sidekicks, the side effects, altered states of mind, which were the suffering that led me back to reconnection. Valerie shared earlier that we as Black people live in a certain space in our minds and our hearts due to racialized trauma and the way it intersects with other forms of oppression. I know people who have isolated and take refuge in self as the Buddha instructed. Don't look to me nor to any of the great disciples, but look to yourself for refuge. This is a deep teaching for those of us on this path. There's a way that marginalized and traumatized people have also taken great refuge in self. I know I have. This teaching can also be a slippery slope, though, because what I've discovered in the last 4 months is that between this need for self isolation, this feeling of safety only when alone, and taking refuge and rediscovering this true self, there is a fine line between truly taking refuge and falling into isolation. It can become non reality based, so much so that it's not a true refuge anymore. It's a false refuge. I think that's the dance, the flow, the wave that really helps us stay connected, to stay in relationship with energies that are also in this time and space, because we are in this time and space. Trying to fly off with the birds and the waves into that other time and space is nice, but not quite safe at times. And I say safe in many ways on a spectrum. My own journey these last months has been to understand my own thinking around what feels safe and when I feel safe. I have come to realize that I often feel safe when I'm alone. It's when I breathe, feel my body and all of me. When I feel pleasure, I feel joy and present. I feel connected to the earth. That's when I feel safe. And then I'm home. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I think, Valerie, do you have a reading for us as well? Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Marisela. And that was from the chapter True Refuge in Oneself. So I'll read from the introduction to the book. And this is a little bit of a little bit more elaboration on what I spoke about of how this all began for me. So on my bedroom dresser, and this is page 4, on my bedroom dresser, I keep an old photo of me as a reminder of the spiritual road I've traveled. It's a photo taken when I was in my early 30s on my first trip to India. I was standing at the arrivals gate at Indira Gandhi Airport wearing a pair of dungarees, cowboy boots, a wool beret, a vest, and a brown bomber leather jacket. Outside, it was a sweltering 98 degrees Fahrenheit. I was clueless. At that moment, I had one goal in mind. I was determined to see the Taj Mahal, and nothing or no one would stand in my way. Up until then, I had lived much of my life with a fierce, hard-nosed determination that showed itself not just in how I dressed, but in how I moved in the world, how I spoke to others, how I listened, or more accurately, how I didn't listen, how I took care of my body, the job I had, and my chosen career as a lawyer and lobbyist. And when I passed the New Jersey bar exam in 1983, I had no intention of being a Dharma teacher. My intentions were crass. They were to make money, to see the world, to make up for youth of poverty and scraping by, and to get out of Brooklyn. And Brooklyn was not the fancy, swanky place it is today. The big shot lawyer, I had the answer before the question was asked. I drove myself hard and others even harder. A series of life-altering watershed moments began to change things. The sudden and painful end of my short and tumultuous first interracial marriage left me bruised and beginning to face up to my hard driving ways. The other watershed moment was attending a public talk given by Thich Nhat Hanh at the Riverside Church in Manhattan in 1995. My brother Trevor, knowing me too well, understood that underneath the hard-as-nails exterior was a tender heart waiting to be set free, to soften. He suggested that I walk down the street to the church to listen to this gentle Vietnamese monk's talk. I walked out of the church after the talk, recognizing that everything Ty had said about love and compassion and peace in oneself was the opposite of how I was living my life. I walked out of the church partially dismissing what I'd heard as unattainable and unrealistic. And yet, a deeper part of me knew that Ty was pointing me in the direction of coming home to myself, to the tenderness, kindness, gentleness that had been squeezed out of my life. That day at the public talk was the beginning of a spiritual journey that led me across faith traditions and continents in pilgrimage to study Kundalini yoga and practice mindfulness meditation within the Plum Village tradition. So I'll stop there.
Thank you both so much. Do you feel ready to transition to some questions and answers from the, well, questions from the audience and answers from you, hopefully? And maybe we can gather some questions in the chat, and I think that's how we said we would do it, right? We'll encourage folks to write their questions in the chat. You can send them either to the whole chat or to me directly, and I will read them aloud for our speakers. And depending on how our timing goes, maybe we'll have some more time for other readings as well before we close. I have one was, wow, really ready to go.
Get into it.
Thank you both and Kyra Jewel for what you have created for us. It is indeed an invitation for a deeper engagement with ourselves and one another. My question, how do you navigate being in social racial justice spaces with other people who are not willing to do the deep inner work you have done and are doing, and are in some cases perpetuating harm by exclusively focusing on outcomes and results? I find I lose my patience. This circumstance has caused me emotional pain, and I become frustrated with myself when I lose compassion for other people, ostensibly working for peace and justice, who I judge are more caught up in their own righteousness or savior complex. Wow, does that resonate? I'd love to hear what either of you have to say about that.
I'm happy to jump in.
Please.
And thank you for the question. The first part, the very first sentence, was it, how do you deal with that, or what was the very first?
How do you navigate? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to I got caught up into the content of it. And wanted to make sure I addressed the questions. How do you navigate? Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit called Village of Love and Resistance, Volar, in Baltimore. We're a Black-Brown led organization that works around healing justice, land liberation, and building a base of community. The people we serve or work with in building a base are primarily low-income Black people in a neighborhood and neighborhoods that have been historically the effect and legacy of redlining, urban renewal, et cetera, and continued gentrification. And particularly the anchor, gentrification, where big anchor institutions, big developers just take land, displace people, and I mean like 100 people, 750 families like that, to rebuild it, for like Hopkins rebuilds, displaces 750 homeowners or resident homes for a biotech park. So this is the population that I work with, and I write a lot of grants. I do a lot of fundraising. I'm writing one right now. That's due Friday. And so one of the things that I find frustrating when, if anyone's written a application for a grant, is the same thing you just mentioned. They're asking for outcomes, and maybe one of you are going to be on some grant board, review board that's reading things that we're submitting, because it's not just one foundation, right? But the outcomes, the numerical quantitative outcomes, and having been doing this for over 20, actually 30 years, this is the part of grant writing that I detest. But I want to say that over these 30 years, I have seen a difference in what some of these funders are asking. So what I'm saying is there is change. I can really say there is change, because sometimes the question is, share a video of people in your organization talking about the problem and the solutions they're trying to find. 20 years ago, not even, nothing like that. That kind of narrative storytelling of what it is we're trying to do on the ground, never, right? So what I'm sharing is that even though there is still those funders, there are still those ones that want you to give that, what percentage of the people are you going to serve, and how many people are going to actually benefit from the project or the program. There is still some change. So that gets at some of that quantitative, for me, the colonial mentality of, if you can't count it, there's no result, because that's real in the field. That's very real. And when you're working in some communities, you can't quantitate it, right? It's not a quantifiable outcome. Then to the other part of that question, which is the people who are coming at it from this sense of self-righteousness, the warrior, what is it, the knight on the white horse, all that. Yes, they're still there. Actually, I was just having a conversation Monday with a colleague. We were just talking about that exact thing. That it's still in the field consciousness of the work around justice. And I think what it is that we are invited to practice even more diligently, so that when we meet that, we know how to meet it. So we're in times now where we can't meet those things anymore with pushing away, saying they don't get it, even though they're showing these behaviors of things that is not going to move us forward. But the way we have to engage with that has to be different. Part of why we're in the place we're in now with this fracturing of our society is because those of us who think we know better have been not as responsive, I think, to those who show up in a certain way. And so I'm practicing this. I'm not just saying this, I'm doing this and trying to do this myself. When I hear the things that start to trigger me, and the people in the space are in a meeting that say the same old story, the city council person, the head of housing department giving permits, wherever they are, right? In a community meeting, I am trying to meet that voice with more compassion, not just a turning away and a hardening. And the story that goes in my head, the kind of hard activist I used to be, where I just curse them out if they said something crazy and tell them they didn't get it. I mean, I used to do that, so I really know it well. I was a good activist because I was so angry. And that's why I spoke so importantly about anger at the beginning, is letting my anger guide me without any companionship with that anger. It's not so good. But now I have this practice of compassion. I have this practice of trying to find my bodhicitta, like Valerie says. And there's no separation. Like, it's not I go over to here to fight the good fight, the justice fight, and then I go over here to pray and worship and meditate. It's not like that anymore. It has to be like, that's what I was saying, that the 21st century is one where these has to come together. And every action that we do whether it's in the city hall testifying for more money for unhoused people, whether it's in the church or with our congregation saying why we might need to act a certain way. It can't be separate anymore. It has to come together. And so how we speak to people, the compassion we have in our hearts, when people say things that are wrong, things that are harmful, things that are oppressive, is how are we going to meet that, right? In a nonviolent way, what Dr. King said, right? What Gandhi said. And I really think this is a challenge of the 21st century, because this that we're dealing with, we have participated in making it. And that's hard for us to say as people who are in the work of justice. We would shun it and say, no way, I've been doing my part. And yet there's a way that without a spiritual practice, we're not going to fully show up. And we're still separating the spirit and the justice work when they really are one. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Great question.
Thanks so much. The person who asked the question is also expressing gratitude that that was really helpful and rich. The next question is much shorter. It asks simply, what is love to you?
I'm happy to jump in. And Marisela, thank you. That is your, oh man, it is so true, so true. If people get nothing out of this time, to walk away with, understanding what you just shared, that is huge, 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 huge. So what is love to me? And oh, thank you so much for inviting that question. And I'm not surprised that the manifestation of love would ask a question about love. So a deep bow and a deep gratitude. I have witnessed your loving presence. And so I turn to you, to that question. When I think about love, you are certainly one of the people that comes to my mind. I also, when I think about love, a couple other things come to mind, many things, I should say. Among the many things would be what Adrienne Marie Brown, the writer and social activist, has said: to love is to show your needs. And that may sound like simple. To love is to show your needs. But when you think about it, when you love a person, that's vulnerable. That's super vulnerable. And that's super gorgeous. How many other mammals are vulnerable in that way? I mean, this is so unique to a human being that we're vulnerable in that way. And so to love is to show one's needs. And I have to say that this to me was like a 180. I walked around for probably a few decades with the attitude like, what's a need? A need? Who has a need? Of course, that's ridiculous, but I was so stoic and, so cut off from myself, from my connection to myself and from other people. So love is turning towards. We turn towards. We turn towards what is difficult. We turn towards what is joyous. We turn towards the people that we rather not turn towards. We turn towards the people that we like, the things we don't like. We get super curious. We show our needs. We show our vulnerabilities. We accept even a tiny bit, and we get curious even a tiny bit. All of that are manifestations of love. But I would really be interested in what folks have to say about to that question, what is love to you? That to me would be, I would love for folks to put in the chat. What is love to you? So I'll stop there.
Take a moment to absorb what you shared and for people to write into the chat anything that comes to them of what love is to you. Service, connecting, opening, practicing compassion for another being as we do ourselves. Belonging. The most powerful force in the universe, the ground of being which connects everything together. A verb, an attempt to know and appreciate others, a healing force, caring and bothering. The only Thank you, friends. We'll let folks continue to add as they think of definitions and return to the next question. How do you see the differences and similarities of meditation in the Quaker way as opposed to the Buddhist way? And I think you could answer that as expansively as you like in terms of kind of the relationships between Quakerism and Buddhism.
Mhm. Beautiful question. And yeah, I'm also grateful for what has been placed in the chat to the other question about love. Yeah, I've written about this in a Pendle Hill pamphlet on the overlap between and the connections between Quakerism and Buddhism. And, of course, there are many. Most obviously, the kind of silence that both Quakerism and the sitting practice in particular, that is so prevalent in much of Buddhism. But what I'm pointing to really here is a practice that allows us to become clear, clarity of mind. And in the Buddhist tradition, we have two main practices, particularly that Thai has instructed us to really cultivate. The first is the practice of shamatha, or stopping, so pausing. And as friends, we do this all the time. Pendle Hill has a half-hour meeting for worship in the mornings. I often participate in that. There's Quaker meeting, often on a Sunday or Wednesday or whatever day of the week it is. That's the practice. That's the equivalent of the practice of stopping. So we could be many other places, but we choose, to safeguard that time for worship. And the second practice is to look deeply, vipassana. And for Quakers, this is the equivalent of a spiritual discernment, which is a faculty of mind and heart that's developed through our daily activities, such as prayer, reading, walking in nature, conversations, respite, many things help to develop this clarity of mind and heart. So there are many, many many overlapping qualities and practices between Quakerism and Buddhism. But what I would like to leave folks with is what Thich Nhat Hanh has written about and talked about extensively, which is, Thai has often said, don't get rid of, don't ignore or leave your root tradition, whether that's Judaism or Sikhism or Jainism or any faith tradition. Whatever that root tradition is, stay with that. Have that enrich your practice of meditation. And so I feel that in many ways, Buddhism and Quakerism really, they're like, they enrich each other. So I'll pause there. And I hope that was useful.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna switch up the order here, but I'll return to all the questions. After writing this book, what question about your experience of healing and home comes forward?
I'm happy to come in here. Thank you, Valerie, for sharing. I definitely, not being a Quaker, was very helpful for me. So the way I received this question, and thank you for the question, or the way I understand is, after writing the book, is there still healing and home? What comes forward? So the book for me, I have to say that, at least for myself, in planning and talking the book out together, writing the book that way, the intention was not for healing. The intention was really, as Valerie shared, to share about the healing that we had experienced walking this path, for the benefit of all beings. Like, really, you don't hold on to it, you share it out, because we're getting healed so we can help others get healed, right? We're not going to heal anyone, but we're going to offer out our example and hope there's something there that someone might find beneficial. But what happened was, healing occurred, more healing occurred. And so that was something that I think I said this at the very beginning, that it occurred during the book, and then it continues to happen, because healing isn't an isolated matter. It's like a web, and once a layer comes off, it's like in pain and body work. When you relieve a pain of someone, let's say by their, I don't know, their 10th thoracic vertebrae or something, you relieve a pain there, and then the person's really happy, and then they say, but now I have a pain lower than that, and almost like, and you made that pain happen there, but no, I mean, maybe, but often it's not that, because what happened is the pain was masking something else, the layering, and so relieving that pain now allowed that other pain to become more apparent. And so now that other pain, now in the lumbar region, is more apparent, right? And healing is just like healing that physicality that I just described. It's the same healing in the mind, body, spirit. Is as you heal something else gets revealed. You might have had an inkling of it, but there was another one that was so right there, like mammoth, bear energy there, that once that got taken care of, then you saw the other one under it, And it's the same thing. So the healing that occurred during the sharing and the deep vulnerability that we shared in writing and putting this book together, revealed more things. And so the path of healing continues. This is the beauty about healing. It doesn't stop. Once you start healing, you cannot go back. It's beautiful. It's like pulling, the little thread on the thing, and then all of a sudden it just unravels. So my answer to that would be, it just reveals how much more healing can be done for me, and that I continue to heal. And the home part, I think what I learned in this book and continue to practice into, and as like Valerie shared, it's a journey, it continues onward, is that home is any moment that I feel it's okay, I'm right here, it's all good. I mean, there could be many things going on. This, I have to do that, got a grant due, got whatever, all that. And in that moment, I can breathe in and out, and I am fully present in this moment, and I am home. I am home in my breath, in my body. What that means is I'm not carrying the weight of whatever it is, but I'm able to be present to what is here now. That journey of reconnecting to that happened for me in the book. And since the book, it's gotten even more clear, like it's really getting really sharp and regular. It's becoming regular, and that's a really beautiful thing, to be able to find home in many different places. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. Another question, I think back to Valerie, would there be a way to be a lawyer lobbyist, maybe for a social justice organization that does build on or incorporate this volition or aspirational purpose that you talked about?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the clients that I represented was the Legal Services Corporation, Legal Aid Society. And the Legal Aid Society provides legal services to low-income people who are facing the most urgent and basic human needs, like food, housing, bodily security, healthcare. And so these are the basic building blocks of what a person needs to simply survive. And that organization, the lawyers, as well as the clients, were the people I represented, the people I advocated for. And I essentially advocated for them what they needed more than anything was funding so that services could be provided to people very much living on the edge, living on the margins. And representing those people, whether I was representing those people or representing a corporate law firm, I did the same exact thing. Now you might say, that's messed up. Why would you do that? Why would you do the same exact thing when you're representing low-income people and you're representing a big corporation? But it really goes back to what Marisela said, which was, I was practicing internally of how to be a human being, how to be a bodhisattva. And so I would begin with myself, and not in a narcissistic way, but to understand what was happening internally for me, to kind of regulate my own, um, first of all, to understand what was happening. Was I triggered? Was I calm? And then getting curious, calming my nervous system to be able to speak and to listen, to understand, to get curious about the other person, to understand their point of view, to listen, not to convince the people of the rightness of my position, but to listen for understanding, to listen with a sense of compassion, to really hear and put myself in that person's perspective. And when I did that, the conversation always changed. Whether it was representing low income people who are on the edge of survival or a big corporation, I was trying to understand the other individual, their perspective, their point of view. And in listening with a more receptive lens, more receptive ears and eyes and being, I think I was able to shift the way I advocated. And I think the result was always different. Maybe I wouldn't get the exact outcome that I wanted or that my client wanted, but the relationship between myself and the other person, that space was different. And that space was changed. And I think that was part of the advocacy. And as a result of that, I think, many things changed. People felt a sense of genuine trust and authenticity, that I wasn't reaching to convince or persuade, but actually reaching to understand. So I engaged in the same practice over and over and over and over and over again. So I hope that that's useful.
Thank you so much. I think we'll share one final question from the audience. And either or both of you can feel free to answer. The question is, what publications or other sources might have inspired this book, and what other sources do you think this book is in conversation with?
I'm happy to start and offer something. I think it's interesting, the question around what other sources that this book is in conversation with. So since it is the book is actually a conversation, maybe that's why I find the language there interesting. So basically, the way I hear and interpret that question is, what other conversations were our conversations connected to? So for me, our conversations come from any, I would say, to the most similar experiences, and then it continues on a spectrum to experiences that aren't exactly the same, but maybe where people have suffered as the broadest source and connectivity. And so in that way, you could say, in the broadest, biggest way, the source is any great teaching, the Buddhist teachings, right? The biblical, whatever source of teachings that have been there that says, this is how we heal, this is how we cross over. And when I say cross over, I mean cross over where we figure out how to deal with our pain without suffering, because that's the teachings of Buddhism. It's not that we're going to stop the impingements that continuously come to our sense doors. It's how are we going to engage with the daily impingements that come to us through all our senses, so that we don't suffer from them, right? That's the great teaching of the Dharma of Buddhism. And if I might say so, I think it's a great teaching of all great traditions. And so on the biggest source, we pull from that. That's the whole idea of we can heal, because it's sourced from the great teachings of people who said they healed, and they showed and they taught the way they healed. So that's the biggest source. And then, you could go down a spectrum, or not down, but across a whole spectrum, a very big field. And maybe the most direct source would be our own healing and journey. And I'm pushing the word source, because I think source almost wants to, and you didn't say this directly, but source almost wants to make it a written source. And let me tell you, it's not only written and very, it's what we think is a source. Needs to be written, and it had to be published somewhere. And coming out of academia for many years, I really pushed back against that. And why is because my grandma and my mother are my big sources of what have taught me the most about healing and getting over adversity and remaining kind and courageous in the midst of very difficult situations. And my aunt, where I've lived with people in my life, and I'm coming up, and see the suffering and see how people dealt with it. So that healing and that ability to heal and still be happy and to have a deep laughter. My mother has this, I'm just astounded sometimes. She laughs and her whole face is a glow. And I look at her and I study it, because I'm like, wow, she's like really in that moment. She is happy. The next moment's a whole other story, right? And that's what I learned. So, I'll bring it right really for me to let's ground it in the lived experience, and not so much for me. And I could quote many books, and that's what the initial thought, it's like, oh, let me see, there's this and there's that, there's Audre Lorde, there's all these people. I started, there's James Baldwin, there, like all that. And then I dropped it and I was like, no, go back to the sources. Yeah, go back to the ancestors. That's why it says teachings on ancestors' joy and liberation. Yeah, so I'll turn it over to Valerie if you wanted to
What was
on.
what was the question?
The question was what sources inspired this book, and what sources do you see yourself in conversation with? And I was hoping you would interpret source as broadly as you feel led.
Yeah, I love what you said, Marisela, and it's so true. And there were many sources, as Marisela has pointed to. One personally that I have always loved and admired and deeply respected the book Radical Dharma by Reverend Angel and Lama Rod, and forgive me, I've forgotten the third author of that. Just a beautiful book, and there are certainly others, but the being in conversation, I think, was really was really something to me, that kind of informal exchange about the Dharma. It's often the Dharma feels so rigid, like I'm going to sit up here and be on this platform and teach this stuff. No, we were just like trying to figure this out. And so we really wanted the feeling of joy. Yeah, the feeling of conversation to be present in the book. That's why we've got the playlist. And that's why it's filled with the recipes from, foods that we love. So we really wanted it. We really are grateful to those folks, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have written in this way. We're greatly indebted to those folks. And this book is a kind of echo of that. And as I mentioned initially, there is not enough of that, certainly in Buddhism, or I should say in Quakerism, in both. But, Francis, there was a question in the chat from Kim about a curiosity around love showing one's needs. And there's a whole thing that I could say. And I'm curious about the question, and I'm just kind of reading it here. How does one avoid the temptation to view others only through the prism of one's needs and not on their own terms? So first of all, let me just say that right there, the recognition of that is a manifestation of love, right? To recognize that you're not going to view someone only through my own my own satisfaction, my own desire, right? Or my own attachments. And I think that recognition is really, really important. What I was pointing to in responding to the question that O asked about love is we live in very often in a world, particularly in the United States, where, kind of a lone wolf, loneliness epidemic and all of that, where there is less of a sense of belonging and connectedness. And so what I'm pointing to is the beauty of belonging, the beauty of showing our needs, the beauty of vulnerability, the beauty of community. I'll stop there.
That is such a beautiful place to end us, Valerie. The beauty of community. I want to turn it over to Marisela for a final closing meditation.
Thank you. So we can bring ourselves to some stillness, just for a moment, that pausing. Bring ourselves back as we started, noticing the feet connected to the earth beneath us that supports us. The earth's always supporting us, even when we are not in awareness. And so just dropping in now to that reality of the earth under us, supporting us always, holding us, Mother Earth, and letting the energy from the earth, Mother, flow into us. And when we feel full, We breathe out and release that which doesn't serve. We release into the elements, knowing the elements are spacious and expansive and can transform, and the elements are no other, the elements outside are no other than us, the elements inside. And so in this way, we refresh ourselves with the bounty of the elements outside, reconnect and belong to each other, belonging in community, belonging with love. We can breathe all that in and breathe out all that we just created together, and let it spread far and wide. Let others benefit from this connection. Those we know, we don't know, those we may never know, those in places of difficulty, internal and external, conflict, genocide, that they may benefit from this place of pausing and reconnecting. May it be so. Ashe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisela and Valerie. It is really incredible to learn with you. Thank you, everyone who joined us. As we talk about sources and conversation, the authors are inviting you in the chat to join their conversation and leave a review of their books. That's, I think, a real way that you can continue to lift up the work that they're doing, is visiting the links in the chat and leaving a review. If you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend it. And I hope you'll tell your friends and consider giving it as gifts this season to spread this learning far and wide. And we look forward to continue to build community together. You'll receive an email with other upcoming opportunities at Pendle Hill and information about how to continue to share about this incredible resource that these authors have gifted us. Thank you, everyone. There's a lot of gratitude being shared in the chat. We're gonna let everyone unmute to say goodbye if they want to.
Good night. Thank you so much
Good
for
night.
this.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Love and
Great
namaste.
to have you. Great to see you, Mary.
Oh, hi.
Thanks for being here. See you all.